times that you have tried to play the game, trying to have things your way. It's led to nothing and things still remain the same. And I don't wanna play. So you see that this is not the way to be, and the time has come to choose. If it comes down to a fight between you and me, then you are doomed to lose.
Keep the red flag flying here.
What is the battery?
Oh, wow.
Who can't hear me? No one can hear me. So there we go. Welcome to Socialist Night Live. It's really nice to see you. Things are looking a bit different tonight. We have real life humans who are in proximity with one another, which is kind of like, you know, what a really nice thing to see after a load of lockdown. So we're really, really pleased to see you all. Please remember to like and share and subscribe to everything tonight. That would be very much appreciated. And I'm going to say quickly hello to Laura. Hello, Laura.
Hello. I'm not on mute, am I? I don't want to do the same thing, but hello.
No, that was entirely down to my poor management of everything. I was just saying before I came on as well, I'm really pleased with what I've done. And I've done a really clever setup tonight, and then I just blew it all by being absolutely
You just
terrible.
messed it up.
And now we have some really brilliant guests. So would you mind introducing yourselves?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, my name's Abel. I'm from Newcastle. I'm a student at the minute.
Hi, I'm Maxine. I was born in Hong Kong, but I grew up mostly in Newcastle. Student at Socialist down in London. And yeah.
Yeah, I'm Chris, and I'm a student in Newcastle.
Brilliant. See, we discussed earlier on about whether people needed to like put lavish titles on themselves, but we did explain that we're more interested in people. We're interested in actual people rather than titles. And the reason we've got you on as well, we're going to talk a little bit about the show that's just been on, which was Joe Guinan. But the reason that we've got you on is because you've been involved in the Kill the Bill protest today.
Yeah,
That's right.
yeah.
Yeah, but it's been one of, I guess,
It's
6
the
weeks.
fifth one in Newcastle.
Yeah, and it was with the theme of international solidarity today, talking about the protests that are going on around the world, but also, of course, why we need like the very immediate battle in this country to kill the PCS bill the government are bringing through.
and that's what we're going to be coming on to very, very shortly. So you've been out, you've been busy, you haven't had the opportunity to watch the show from earlier on. So me and Laura are going to talk about Joe Guinan for a second. Laura, what did you think of Joe? You did the editing and you've watched it as well. What did you think of Joe's show?
I think Joe's fantastic. I think a lot of his ideas sort of I think the idea around economics and organising and all of that can seem really highbrow, and Joe's someone who's really, really intellectual and really experienced, and I think it could have come across a bit too like over people's head. So I was worried when we were going to interview him because I know how wonderful he is, but I watched it and I was just like, yeah, you just ticked so many boxes, and I just thought if we could just do what Joe says, we'll be fine. Let's just listen to Joe Filida. It was incredible. It was really, really interesting. And it's like a lot of the shows we do, it was very much based around collectivism, grassroots activism, all the stuff we keep bleating on about all the time. So it's really nice. And he just really knows his stuff. You know, just all this knowledge just rolls off his tongue really easily. And I loved it. I thought it was great. Really, really interesting. And I urge everybody who hasn't seen it to go back and watch it again.
Yeah. The bit I loved was when he was talking about his friend who set up the Democracy Collaborative. Have any of you seen the film The Post? So it's all about like it's a few years ago. There was, I think it's a 2018 film or something like that, and it was about Tom Hanks was in it, and it was about the Vietnam War. And someone stole all the records that the government had about the Vietnam War and started putting them out in the New York Post. And it was about how the Washington Post then tried to get hold of them and start publishing these basically really evil things that the US government had been doing. And he was talking about this guy who isn't mentioned in it, but was absolutely crucial in everything that happened there. So it's worth watching the interview to find out about this guy who'd I don't know, he described him as the Forrest Gump of left-wing politics in the USA, because anything that happened, he was there in the background, he was doing all these things. So yeah, really interesting stuff. So do go and watch that. Right, we're going to move on now to Kill the Bill and our special guest. So I guess any of you do feel free to talk amongst yourselves and and you know, like almost like you're having a conversation between the three of you. Tell us what this was about. Tell us why you had this Kill the Bill protest today.
I guess like the main 3 points I was pushing, to put into the context, it was the 4th National Day of Action today, so there were protests going up and down, like up across the country, up and down across the countries. Sorry, words. And yeah, today, like the 3 main points that we sort of reiterate throughout is the fact that the bill is like an attack on our right to protest, also increasing stop and search powers, which we know like affect Black and brown communities the most, and also how it criminalises Gypsy, Roma and traveller communities' way of life by criminalising trespass. Yeah. Do you want to talk about the theme? International solidarity?
I guess I think the national stuff is quite interesting, like big protests in London, I guess, and like they've been linked with like the international solidarity stuff as well, which I guess is kind of why I think that's been like a theme throughout all the Kill the Bill movement, which has been good. So yeah, and like a lot of people came today, like spoke from the communities that have been, I guess, like actively like have connections in the places. Stuff's going on. So big community people came from Colombia to speak about the national strike that's been going on there. For I think a month now, they've been on national strike and facing like really awful police violence in the streets, but organising back really strongly and like in the indigenous communities as well, fighting back. So like kind of wanting to raise the voice of that, but bring the commonalities between what we're like. It's the same like systems of police, and it's actually the UK police that are training the Colombians. Yeah, training the Colombians. I guess the UK police we can talk about more.
Yeah, I didn't know anything about. So the UK police are training the Colombian police.
Yeah, which are the ones that have been really violent. Yeah.
And that's quite interesting as well, because there are links historically with the British police training the South African police. And, you know, and I'm not an expert in this one, and one of our viewers will probably stick this in there, and they'll probably like put some context to there. But with regards to what happened in Northern Ireland and how Northern Ireland was policed, apparently they became quite expert at dealing with people who they didn't necessarily agree with politically in their own country to an extent. So perhaps that's why the British police are training them. I don't know anything about that, by the way. I'm putting like a massive thing out there that I'll probably get in trouble for. But
no, I think it's similar. Like I was talking a bit about Hong Kong, and I'm pretty sure like the UK have links with training the police over there as well. Yeah, I guess that's got like a colonial history behind it as well.
So it's the UK laws, like the old anti-union laws that were passed over from the UK that are now being used to criminalise protests in Hong Kong. Yeah. So it's like a very much a connection there. I think like it's also just like not kidding ourselves, like who the police like really are, like where they came from. Like I guess it was based first on the like I guess that's quite an important part of the campaign, is like recognizing how like rotten from the core the police are, I guess.
Yeah, literally.
And saying that, no, it's I think that was,
it's not a few bad apples. It's like a rotten seed. Thing. It's a rotten seed. You can't. Yeah.
So I often speak, and I think people really struggle with this concept when they're talking about the police. You aren't talking about individuals. You aren't talking about a few bad apples. You're talking about the system in which they work. And systems make people behave in certain ways who wouldn't necessarily otherwise do that. So it's not like the idea that like every police officer is this evil being that will do these evil things. It's the system in which they work. It's the way they're trained. It's the, you know, those things that I guess you're protesting about. Is that fair?
Yeah, no, I think it's important to like. I think first of all, there are like a lot of police officers that probably are. They're like, well, do get high. No, like the opposite.
Oh, well, the opposite.
But yeah, I think it's more like the structure of the police in general. Talking like, who do they actually protect? Is what like it's just general like more police powers to come and kill the bill as well, which I think is just one of the things I'm protesting against as well.
Yeah. Like we've seen it with the these protests, like how violent they've been. They've been really violent in Newcastle.
Yeah, and I guess like talking about how it's like the structure that might make that influence an individual to act in like a bad way. For example, when I was dealing with a police officer recently because of these Kill the Bill protests, he like racially profiled me and asked he said something, he called me Oriental basically, and I felt really uncomfortable with it and called it out. And he got really protective and really defensive, and then justified it by saying, oh, that's what the system says, like that's what it is on the computer, like it's on the database, like I'm not racist. I'm like, but then you're just proving my point that is a systemic issue, not just an individual issue. And he like just didn't know what to say. So like I agree, like it's not it's not just about like the individual inherently already like joining the police force as a bad person, but also the structures, like how it can affect someone's like way of thought and mindset and language. Yeah.
That's really interesting, you say, because sometimes I think we can, you know, the best thing to say in that case for the officer is like, oh, sorry, is that not a right thing to say? Oh, I'm really sorry if I've been offensive. And then you kind of learn and move on. But it sounds like, oh no, well, that's what I've got written on my list, so that's fine. I'm fine. I'm correct because that's what's on my list. You know, I think Laura. Oh no, please come in. I didn't realize you were about to speak there. Come on.
Well, but just on what the point you said there about like the police could have like. I don't think there is a good response for police. Like, however well-meaning and like apologetic they are, it's like I don't think like there's not like maybe you want to, I don't know how it would have been that situation, but the police being nice, like there's not really a nice way to be a police officer because like the structure is there, what they're bound to do. I don't think like they could really do it in a better way. I'm sure we could hold them more accountable.
But also the whole accountability issue is so difficult. Like we've had a lot of protesters in Newcastle wanting to make complaints against the police and also just calling out their disproportionate policing and the way they've mishandled things. And the complaint system is so inaccessible, and also it's just a bit of a gaslighty process to go through, to have to like live through it again and like have to prove your experience to the person who has done you the injustice is like really weird and not like an inaccessible process, like I said. And
and I wanted to make a complaint as well, like before, and the thing the lawyer, I spoke to the solicitor about it, and the thing that he said was that the independent like police complaints department or whatever it is like the most like always on the side of the police, and it's like it's just within that whole structure is everything just works for them. They know that they're protected by the law because they are the law, pretty much.
Laura, you haven't spoken yet, so
I have been listening with great intent. This has been wonderful. Unfortunately, I've got a lot of notes, and I feel like I could go down quite a few different paths on this one. So just bear with us, and please tell me to shut up at any point. But in terms of, first of all, I love what you have done today in terms of internationalism. I think that we really need to start sowing those seeds a bit better amongst our communities, because I think that's the only way we can move forward, not only as a society, but as a world. We really need to be looking after each other and be internationalists, and not... you can be proud to be British or English or whatever you want, but you also need to be proud to be a human of this earth and start looking after each other, because everything's a mess. So please, let's just look after each other. Obviously, that is stripped down to the absolute bare bones of what we really should be doing. But I really want to come in on, I guess, all the police stuff. The Kill the Bill protests and everything are absolutely fantastic, and I know so many people who've been on them today up and down the country, and it's brilliant. I agree that I don't think we can necessarily hold individual police officers responsible for the whole system. It is a systemic issue, and you know, like you've just said there, it is like even written in their rules and policies and guidelines is incorrect wording and things like that. So yes, it is a systemic issue, but it is absolutely a problem. We look at, I mean, if we go back to long before your time, kids, this is where I feel really old, but we go back to the 1984 miners' strike, and the police absolutely tore strips off all the miners. You know, I look at Orgreave, where they went in battens first. You know, that was a planned attack on ordinary working class people. And then we skip forward a bit and we go to when John Major was in charge, and the police stopped kicking the crap out of people, and people said to the police, "Why aren't you hitting us?" He said, "Oh, we've got a different leader now." So it does go to show that it's a very top-down structure. Someone at the top tells the police to do something and they just do it because that's what they've been told. They don't question it, it just happens. And I think that's what it goes to show, that it is at the very core of our democracy. I mean, for God's sake, if we've got somebody like Priti Patel who's in charge of telling police officers what to do, then what chance have we really got? You know, somebody who's clearly shown themselves to be a racist, a capitalist, and I mean that in the worst sense. You know, she doesn't care about working class people, and will use the police as a tool to get us. I think that has been proven in everything she's done. Also, one thing I'd mention, so this is another wide-ranging issue in terms of the police, but I think it does positions of power like the police, like doctors, and you know, things like that lend themselves to being in charge, I think those roles do sort of they are of interest to people who want to have power and want to have power over other people. So I think, as much as I've said there, you can't blame really the individuals. There are individuals who are just doing those jobs because they like to be in power and they like to have power over other people. If you listen to Woman's Hour last week, there was a piece on the super complaint that's in at the minute about the whole systemic nature of police officers not being held accountable for their actions in terms of domestic violence and the things that they get away with because they're police officers. And Chris, like you said, it's the IPCC, I think, and not a great deal has been done as yet, unsurprisingly. Sadly. So that's gone into this super complaint, and some of the stories are absolutely devastating. The families of these police officers who have to live through this with no accountability whatsoever. The police seem to just have, a carte blanche to just do what they want. It's really, really sad, and we all need to be on this straight away. And the thing is, once you start criticizing a structure or a certain part of the community, then you are going to go, well, not all police. Yeah, okay, right. Not all police, not all white people, not all men. That argument just doesn't wash anymore. It's absolutely pathetic. So we all know it's not every police officer, but there's clearly a problem here. And I just love what you guys are doing. I think it's absolutely fantastic. Like I say, up and down the country today. And I just worry that there hasn't been enough footage. The media plays a big part in protecting this system. And we need to keep going at it. So that was my lengthy rant on the situation. But that's not what I've got to say about it.
So what I'm going to do now is I've just there's some really good questions coming in. So one of the things I've realised that we haven't particularly done is define why this bill is so bad. And I think a lot of the time we know we're talking to each other, but what if someone just stumbled into this conversation? So, do the police have too few powers at the moment? I think that's just a yes/no question. So, do any of us think that the police have too few powers and need protection from things?
No.
So this bill gives police more powers to deal with. What would you think might be a good thing for the police to deal with? What they've come up with is protesters. Is protest a bad thing? Like, historically, have we looked back through time, do we see protest as being this terrible thing that has held us back somehow?
If you're part of like the elitist status quo that don't want to be challenged, then sure. Yeah. But
absolutely, to some people is a bad
but for ordinary people, no, not at all.
I think those people who've protested in the past and won all those rights in the past for themselves, they probably kind of appreciated it. And I think sometimes people don't realise what protesters gained for people and what the police were originally there for. So does anyone have any input on, what the police were originally set up to do? Does anyone know that one?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it was kind of what it's based around the colonial system of the original police were police of slaves. That's where it's come from. And then that kind of got I think historically came back through the big cities, I guess, through London. As there was more of a working class community started to be established, they were there to control strikes when there's a lot of strike militancy, to crush them. They've always been there as the enemy of the working class movement, I guess.
And also to protect private property as well. That's a big role that they play.
And when you're talking private property, you aren't talking about people's homes or anything like that. You're talking about the establishment, the capitalist class, and so on.
God! So the police force were genuinely invented to keep working class people down. Fabulous! That is news to me. I did not know that. Oh my God! I guess it makes sense. There's
this thing that people sometimes do, and it happened during the 2019 thing when we talked about police cuts. in the election, and people were talking about like they were saying, you know, the Tories have cut all the police, and then people started saying, talking about like socialist structures, and they were like the NHS, the police, and we're like, the police aren't a socialist structure. You know, not everything that's paid for by tax is socialist. You know, it's a really right wing weird thing to say that the police are socialist. But anyway, so all those things, the bill now. One of the things we haven't talked about is the fact that this bill also will make it almost impossible to prosecute undercover police officers for doing things like raping people. Yeah, has anyone got, like, I'm not an expert on this, has anyone got any insight into this particular aspect of the bill?
I don't have any real life insight in that I'm not married to a police officer who's been lying to me all this. At least I hope I'm not Paul.
I'm caught out again.
But I just feel like it's really damaging to have a police officer go undercover. I mean, I'm sure that's a really difficult job, but to then go, right, you can go off and do whatever you feel is necessary to fulfill your role, including breaking every single law. And there's loads of stories come out where people have married those police officers not knowing that they're police officers and have built a life with them. And, you know, their whole life is based around a lie. That has got to be absolutely crushing. I know they do far worse than that, but I just think from a point of view of if you've set up this life and you get married and you have kids and everything's lovely and you think you're really happy, and then to find that you haven't, that is just like something from a film, from a thriller. It's absolutely awful to find out that there is no repercussion to that. It's just like, yeah, that's fine, you're doing your job. You've ruined people's lives. To do what? Like, to what end?
To find out what Greenpeace are up to, because they're the bad guys. So I guess I'm going to refer to you as a panel. Come in, give us your views on this.
So I think that a lot of that, because there's actually a few bills as well go through.
Yeah, I was going to talk about spy cops and overseas.
I think spy cops has gone through.
Yeah,
and that was the one that I think we abstained on, but it went through. That had a lot of undercovers on. And this one's like, so this one, I think a lot of it is about shutting down demonstrations. So like putting limits on like noise levels, like if it causes any kind of nuisance, if it causes any economic disruption. So that's obviously like all strikes are really restricted by this.
Yeah, and I think like the part of the bill that's about protests is when it's like you can basically get either a £2,000 fine, I think, or 10 years in prison, and then it says if you put someone at risk of causing someone like serious annoyance, like the wording of the bill is so vague that it's like, even if you like, what is if I put someone at risk? It just basically gives the power to just shut down any protest that they don't agree with.
It's essentially criminalizing protest.
Yeah.
Protest is no longer based on that. Potentially.
Yeah, I think the problem with that is who gets to decide what's too loud and who gets to decide what is an annoyance. And I even saw in there that one person with a placard could be seen as, you know, an annoyance and could be subject to the same punishment. And really, how much damage is one person going to do stood there with a placard? It's scary. It is just designed to shut us down, isn't it? To shut any sort of questioning of the establishment down.
Before I bring in some questions from our viewers tonight, the last thing I want to say, Maxine, did I meet you on a about the proroguing of Parliament in Durham before? Were you there in Durham when we had a proroguing of Parliament rally?
I don't think so. Sorry.
Oh, what a shame! I didn't know whether I'd met you. So the idea was there. You mentioned Hong Kong earlier on, which is why, because I was speaking to a protester who was mentioning that they'd been involved in the Hong Kong protests. I didn't know whether that was you or anyway. So you were mentioning about Hong Kong. What is the what are the similarities between what is going on in Hong Kong, which you mentioned earlier on, and in the UK?
Well, I guess it's, you know, the same struggle against the police being able to abuse their powers and to clamp down on protesters, and also like trade union activists. A lot of them have been like imprisoned and arrested and imprisoned and put on trial. Yeah, it's sort of like this piece of legislation, I guess similar in how like the 2019 Hong Kong protest started. It was against this extradition bill, focusing on this piece of legislation, and then in the end also the national security laws, which have been passed through now. But yeah, just sort of like that, yeah, same struggle against like police being able to abuse their powers and clamp down on like mass mobilization. Yeah.
So is that where do you think that is going to be something that we become more likely here? Because you had a lot of people in the UK saying like, you know, oh, well, you know, that could never happen here. That could never happen in the UK. Well, it does, doesn't it, to an extent? It does, not to extreme degrees yet, but we're seeing more and more the idea, like, actually, you know, like we've seen, for example, a nurse in Glasgow on the same day as Rangers went out and pissed everywhere, basically, and, you know, the Ranger supporters went out and had a big party on the streets, and the same day a nurse who was campaigning against an NHS pay cut was fined £10,000 for standing with a placard. So, you know, is this what could happen? What is the worst thing that can happen, do you think, if this bill goes through?
I think partly like there is like a lot of ongoing violence, especially like around stop and search. I guess like, especially like in cities, I think police are like particularly violent to young people, especially young black people. Like face a lot of violence away from police, and like of course like the border system as well. I guess that's where there's a lot of violence being like enacted already by the police. I guess that kind of thing is going to worsen. Like stop and search is going to worsen. Also the violence against like Gypsy Roma traveller communities worsening. I think that's like really serious. That's like criminalizing the whole like way of life is like deeply racist and really violent. I think that kind of thing's worse. But so I guess that's like quite immediate things that like you need to be aware of. But I think like we keep in mind as well, like we have, regardless of like just the attacks, and that's like we need to like our movement as well needs to like be on the streets, needs to be protesting and fight with, like for the international things, we need to be out on the streets with them, disrupting the brands that are in support of them. It's like a lot of what we do is like targeting like in the protests, talking about the UK brands as well as UK police funding places. Like UK brands who are based in the UK are often like very complicit in stuff that's going on around the world. So like the freedom to protest outside of them, that's like a lot of stuff we need to go and do, which will be restricted by the law. So, and it will be repressed pretty badly.
Yeah, I think why we feel so passionate about this as well, because like, I don't know, protest is like a very fundamental thing, and to us like it feels really scary and quite like a dystopian future to imagine a world where we could like be seriously targeted even more so than now for encouraging like protests on the street and encouraging people to communicate and have that dialogue in that space.
I think the idea, like if you like even go on the government website and it literally names like BLM and XR as like basically the reason, the idea that we need to introduce more like legislation because these are two like causes that have been like really effective with their protests. Like, I don't think it's because they're causing disruption, because these protests are actually they're working. Yeah. So it's just to repress it.
It's that false equivalence as well. Like, I'm a teacher, and the Prevent documentation that came out had far right symbols, and they had like Combat 18, and you know actual like the Nazi flag and all these different things like that are very clearly far right ideological symbols. And then they said, oh, recognize left wing symbols, Greenpeace, vegan flag, you know, like St. Pauli Football Club. These were the things that they were trying to create a false equivalence between, like these really benign agencies who are just doing things. Like one of them's a football team, one of them's Greenpeace, you know, and they were trying to create a false equivalence between being a Nazi and, oh, you know, it's that Donald Trump thing, isn't it? There are bad people on both sides. Like, these bad people are actually want to eradicate a whole race of people, whereas these bad people want there to be less plastic in the ocean. You know, it's just weird.
Well, it comes up less for uni as well, like the way that prevents use is like pretty like Islamophobic and as well, again, racist from the core. Use like, sure, like it includes, it says it's like targeting other stuff, but like routinely cracks down majority on people. Actually, people not even talking about like things that couldn't even be like attached to anything like violent, or like, I guess the whole like terrorist narrative, I think, has a lot of often viewed as a lot of racism. But people who are talking about like peace and justice internationally, or like solidarity with causes, like these kind of like words like justice, solidarity, human rights, like trigger prevent, and people get brought up for like for that kind of thing.
Yeah.
We've got a question come in from Twitch, which is kind of interesting. It is, so what actually needs to be done about the police? And I think this was when we were talking about earlier on about, like, you know, about the police in general rather than this particular bill. But what does need to be done about the police in your view?
We were literally talking about this the other night, in that, like, it's such a complex issue that you can't just say something like a catch-all, like, this is what needs to be done. But I think the number one thing is like like take the funding out of the police and reinvest it into the communities. Like, you need to tackle the root cause of crime, which is in a lot of cases just inequality. So I think we need to reduce the need for a police. Maybe one day abolish it, but we'll see.
Yeah, we're talking about like, can you actually, I think that is like, maybe we're saying, can you actually abolish the police without a revolution, and perhaps that is what's needed. But I think like that is also like the point as well, that we would like really, I don't see it's like something that can be, it could be maybe held more accountable and like made perhaps more accountable to local government. But really it's something that like we could perhaps tweak, but it's like set up and like fundamentally serves the ruling class.
I think like things that have come up, talking about like issues that the police shouldn't be responding to, and issues that the police aren't trained to respond to, stuff like mental health issues, homelessness, also hate crime, because the police just don't know how the fuck to deal with that at all. They just make it, again, a really gaslighty process. Yeah, and like, yeah, just like investing in communities a lot more, social workers, providing like good training that is actually what works for people and not what works for the ruling class.
We have got emotion with all this written down that we're putting through the Labour Party as well. That's also what we're doing about it. I think that's what people could like. We'd like
to see that. Yeah, give that to us and we'll get it through Sedgefield.
Let's do it.
Now, speaking of you've mentioned the Labour Party there, and we saw when people started talking about it, I'm going to relate this to a comment. Leanne Powell has said people need to understand what defund the police actually means, and not the media spin. And I think you've really done quite a good job of immediately coming in with, you're not saying like, you know, it's to do something else. It's prevention rather than not cure. But like, you know, so Keir Starmer came out with like, rather than about Black Lives Matter, he was like, oh, it's preposterous, the idea that you defund the police. But you look into the fact of it, and, you know, people, when they spend more on the police, it doesn't reduce crime. And if you look back into 1970s New York, you actually found that when like crime went up when they funded the police to a greater extent, which, like, you know, they became more punitive, and a lot of the crime was actually perpetuated by the police in New York in the 70s, which is absolutely bizarre situation. So I suppose I'm asking you, like, what do you think about, like, how to get that point across about what defunding the police actually means? You don't mean taking people away from communities and people who are doing a good job, I guess. What are you talking about when you talk about defund the police?
I think funding public services. It's
Yeah,
public services and funded, not the police. I think the police, like, yeah, can't like. I mean, I feel like quite should be like quite, yeah, like all these things shouldn't be part of the police. Like, I'm actually, I guess, minimizing what the function of the police should be. Because I guess, like we've said about how they've, this role have always served as like a use of force, to like shut down working class movements. That's like really what everything else is kind of just like being added on to keep the order kind of stuff. But it's like all the services, like, so yeah, like I said, mental health services.
Yeah.
Like a lot of the issues around like crime, of course, come through poverty. So like proper funding, like reversing all council cuts, to get back. That would like be to start to get back to the services that used to exist. And I guess, I know we've kind of been talking about this, like, can you make the police accountable? But where they could perhaps see local councils be have their like roles checked more. I think have more control over their roles through the local council, I think.
I think it's really difficult to do that because, and as much as I absolutely agree with you, it's all kind of like, it's all reliant on the power structure, isn't it? And who gets into power. So, for instance, Durham County Council here has historically been a Labour council. Now it's been taken over by a massive coalition of Lib Dems and Tories, and we all know how that goes. So if we did sort of, I guess, get it down to a local level where the local councillors in government could say what they wanted the police to do, it all relies on those people being, I guess, trustworthy and doing it for the right reasons. I think you were right in that the powers that they've got, and I didn't know the reason the police had set up, and that has just blown my mind today, honestly. I think we need to move away from that and try and get back to police being there. I guess the narrative is to protect and serve. It'd be lovely if that's actually what they were there for. That'd be, I don't know how we do that, but I do know somebody mentioned I was involved in the campaign to make misogyny a hate crime, and the National Police Crime Commissioner had said that they didn't want to do that because police wouldn't understand the word misogyny. And so, number one, you have just branded your entire police force up and down the country as thick. And also, surely there's training to become a police officer. Surely you could go misogyny, don't be a dick to women. There you go, done. Lesson one, tick. But they just didn't want to include it at all. Thankfully, we won, and now police forces have to log any incidences that are designated as misogynistic, so that we can have a proper view of what those cases look like up and down the country. But to use that as use the lack of knowledge as a reason to not do it, it's just not good enough at all. Surely the police they're either this amazing, wonderful, fantastic force for good, or they're not. And the Police and Crimes Commissioner, by saying that, effectively was like, nah, they're too stupid to understand. And it's like, that's not an argument, surely. And you mentioned there as well that stop and search being, really horrendous, and that's going to get worse. And I absolutely agree it is. This is me going off on a Hollywood tangent, but have you seen the film Crash with the stop and search scenes in that? Oh my god, they are absolutely devastating. You kind of think they're really far-fetched, but the more I learn about the police, the more I realize, oh, actually, yeah, they're not. This is really bad. So I would encourage everybody to watch that and be as disgusted as I am by it. So yeah,
I think the mental health thing has really struck a nerve with our viewers tonight. Mia, who's one of our regular viewers, said she was just going to say that they certainly shouldn't be dealing with mental health issues. When she had a breakdown, the reason she kept on going, I kept what was going on for me to myself, was the fear of the police being called. So, like when she was having a mental health crisis, she was terrified of the police being called. A lot of people she knows have had the police involved when they've experienced mental health crisis or made a suicide attempt, but they're not criminals. The police shouldn't be involved. And I think even the police would agree with that. I've spoken to police officers myself who are saying, why in the world am I being called to mental health crises every day? And I would also we are on Socialist think tank here. We do need to state that these mental health crises are a product of capitalism. It's a product of, like, you know, the system that we're living in, that is creating all these mental health crises, and then they're sending the police in to deal with it. And we saw, like, Dalian Atkinson, the famous Aston Villa footballer who scored one of the best goals I've ever seen when I was a kid. I was, like, so amazed. And then he was having a mental health episode that called the police, and they tasered him, and tasered him to death, basically. You know, so why are the, you know, I guess the question is, why are the police being asked to do things to do with mental health when they're probably the least appropriate people to be dealing with mental health services? I don't know. I'm taking that
because
to the
a
panel
robust mental health service would cost more money, and they don't want to spend it on. I do believe that our government just can't be asked to look after people and don't want to spend money on in the places where it's needed the most. So just give all these responsibilities to police, let them deal with it. It's not good enough. I mean, we've been saying for years that the mental health support system in this country is absolutely pathetic, to the point where it is still a stigma to even mention that you might have a mental health problem. Oh, you're mental, God, don't talk to me. You know, and the fact that celebrities are the people who were trying to bring this to the forefront, not our government and not our education system. And you know, it's devastating, really, because it's such a big issue that impacts such a huge majority of the people in this country. And after lockdown, I guarantee that number has rocketed. We should be able to talk about it, and we should have a robust system that helps, and certainly not a police force to come and tell us that we've done something wrong because we're struggling. No wonder people don't want to report things, you know. And on the not reporting things, I'm in talks with people about starting a campaign around how bad it is to report a sexual attack. I've spoken to so many women from the Northeast who've literally said to me, I would much rather experience that attack again than report it to the police, because the investigation was so intrusive and so accusatory and so terrifying that they'd rather go through it again. That is an indictment on our police system and shouldn't be allowed. And so there are many layers to why the police aren't doing the job they're supposed to do, which is to look after us, in my opinion. Clearly I've been naive and have had that totally wrong, and they're not there for that. It's devastating, it really is. The whole thing is just pathetic. So yeah, sorry I've gone off on a tangent with that.
Panel.
Yeah, I think the whole thing about servant protect is an illusion. I don't think we have.
Yeah.
I don't think we have any faith that the police will protect us. Like, yeah, they're quite an explicit purpose what they would do, and yeah, I think like the stuff where like unfortunately like people like are reliant on them for like quite immediate situations is stuff that will be better managed not by the police, as we've come to.
And also, like, putting police in those spaces, like we've mentioned, that they're just not trained to do, like gives like opportunity for those like bad apples that we've been talking about or whatever to use that power and to like enact like whatever like racist or misogynistic motivations that they have behind it, and like really just further damages the well-being of people, especially in mental health, but like also like reporting crime. Like I really agree on like what Laura was saying there before, how it's such, like we were mentioning before, such an inaccessible process and just traumatic process. Like how can we really report these issues to an institution that literally like maintains that sort of power and like, yeah.
I think it's pretty powerful when you realise how few people. So I suppose if the police were genuinely here to protect in the legal system, not just the police, the legal system was here to protect people. one of the things we would see is people being convicted of sexual offences and rapes, and when you see how few people actually report that, given the trauma that they go through. And I know, Laura, you were speaking to people about people who would rather not report the crimes than
But it wasn't just rather not report the crimes. It was literally, I would rather go through that attack again than go through the experience of having reported it. You know, that is absolutely damning. It's really, really bad. That shouldn't be a thing. You know, being attacked should be the worst thing that could ever happen to you in your entire life. You shouldn't then be made to feel like a criminal because something's happened to you, which is the feedback that we're getting. You know, we've been speaking to people who have gone to Rape Crisis UK as well, and the sheer amount of crimes that never get any justice. Never. It's like 4% of all reported sex crimes go to court, and they're only the reported ones. And even like 1% of them actually get a conviction. It's absolutely tiny. And this is a huge deal, and it's been going on for so long. And I happen to think that it is another nail in the coffin of the misogynistic society that we live in. Women don't matter, and it's not just women. It's anyone who gets attacked in that way. It's almost like the police just don't want to deal. So it's like, we'll not bother doing this properly, and they treat the victim as the perpetrator. And it's really upsetting. We do need to do something about it. And I'm pretty confident that that is not the only injustice in our reporting system. I'm sure there are plenty. And I think we've learned a lot tonight about that. Just knowing that the police haven't necessarily treated people in the way that they should have been treated, or listened to victims of crime in the way they should have, and have been given a top-down structure to abide by.
Yeah, and then we don't look for police to solve these things. I don't think we aspire to have like loads of police out arresting rapists every day. We aspire for those rapes not to happen in the first place. Obviously, it's not.
I mean, that would be lovely. Yes.
It's not like, I don't think we look to the police to solve these issues. That's my point. I guess I don't think they won't be solved by the police like being more on it or like more.
Yeah.
Like it needs like, there's obviously a lack of that in the immediate term, but
yeah, and also like going off what you were saying about how it's been such like a long-standing issue, like the hype around police injustice recently to do with like the Kill the Bill movement, but also the reporting of like Sarah Everard's murder and stuff like that. A lot of people were only sort of waking up to this sort of stuff like this year, and like it's something that's been going on for so long, especially for like minority communities in the UK. I'm happy that like a lot of people are waking up to it, but also to recognize that like it's something that people have been struggling with every day for a really long time is also important too. Like there's a history there. It's not.
The Labour movement needs to catch up with that.
Yeah, exactly. Like, yeah.
Now I can see that the light is fading where you are, so I'm going to which is it still looks lighter than here. I don't know, you're not that far north of us, are you? But so I'm going to finally just ask, do you find that, like, given the evidence around the fact that crime sentencing, you know, increased sentences and punishment, there's no evidence that increasing punishment levels reduce crime. So, like, you know, people aren't put off by the massive sentence that we'll add an extra 10 years on. Oh God, I'll get an extra 10 years if I rape someone, therefore I will not do the rape, you know, is not something that apparently has any sort of effect at all. Do you find it really depressing that, like, that's another thing in this crime bill that, like, for example, the Labour Party are like, oh, I'm fully behind this. I'm fully behind the idea that we'll have increased sentences. And they think that politically, rather than go out and explain, actually, longer sentences don't reduce crime. Why in the world are people, like, why in the world are the Labour Party falling in with this idea that increased sentences will somehow magically reduce crime. Is that a depressing thing?
Yeah, I don't know. I just feel like a lot of the time, it's easier for like the politicians to just go with like the easy explanations and stuff, like getting into a whole debate on why like longer sentences don't actually reduce crime isn't going to fit into like what they want to say on the TV of like 5-second soundbite or something. But I think we also need to look at like why, like what our prison system in general, like are people just going in it just to keep them off the streets, or should it be more of a rehabilitation kind of thing about it? And I think that's something that I would like to see a Labour Party stand up for.
Absolutely, yeah, me too. Yeah. No one thinks about the prison sentence when they commit a crime. You know, you don't commit a crime plan to go to prison for it. Yeah, like the issues are like, it's not the lack of punishment that people basically cause crime, it's the poverty, like, and the structures of misogyny and racism that exist in society, like crimes. So yeah, I think that needs to be like I agree, like you're saying, what Labour have been tough on it essentially. Needs like that like hope. I thought like maybe Black Lives Matter has probably shifted a lot in the movements in the Kill the Bill now, but it's still a battle to be won in the Labour Party on that. To make people realise.
Many battles. So how can we support you in the Kill the Bill campaign? How can we go about like helping as individuals? Like if we're watching this, what can we do?
I mean, obviously people can look to the Kill the Bill. I'm sure there's a website, and also Sisters Uncut do a lot of work on this. You can help oppose the bill, but also I think the beauty of like the Kill the Bill movement is the fact that it affects so many different issues as well. There's a lot of issues that need people helping to like resist police powers in general, and like there's a lot of campaigns, like you mentioned before, Laura, getting misogyny recognised as a hate crime. There's a lot of different campaigns that people can be working on in the meantime to fight against the powers that the police have and that they continue to abuse. Where else?
And I think like getting the using the structure of the Labour movement is pretty crucial. Like there haven't really been on the Kill the Bill demonstrations much yet. Like it's been mostly down to like individual and like mostly quite young activists to like pull these things together, like under a lot of police pressure, and like the big like Labour movement organisations haven't been there. I don't know when the last time the Labour Party supported protests was.
Yeah, literally, like, we've had no politicians down at the demos.
Like no one, none of like the political figures have like stood up, which like could have actually been quite useful against like the violence of the police. So like having I guess like Labour representatives should be there.
Yeah,
really,
putting pressure on those structures that we have, and the people who are in those structures.
Like we said,
as well.
we've got the motion going through Labour Party. We like all want to pass that out our branches and take it to the CRP. I can like use, and I think the same as well in the unions. People can pass motions in the unions. Like the unions should really be out on these Kill the Bill demonstrations. I think, like it's their rights to strike that are being taken away. Like it's really crucial that should be out there with us. Do you have more stuff to add?
I was just gonna say like first main thing I think people should be doing is like joining the protest, like getting out.
Yeah, sure, exactly.
Like the bill is due back
in Parliament
next month.
Yeah.
So whenever the next National Day of Action, it's got to be like the biggest one. So yeah, even if you can't like make it, just like share stuff about it online and stuff like that. I think that's like the most immediate thing. Is just actually get on the streets.
Yeah.
Sounds good to me. Laura, how can you get involved in the Socialist think tank?
Oh God, how can you get? Well, easily. You can follow us and like and share and subscribe on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. We have a website as well, and you can become a member. You can become a member for free because we are socialists. But if you do happen to have a spare couple of quid to give us so that we can keep creating content like this, then please do. It is very, very much appreciated. On the what can you do? I just want to point out something we haven't really touched upon, but I've seen loads in the comments tonight, and that is the the changes that have benefited the working class have never come from government. They have always come from protests, like the suffragettes. You know, women wouldn't be voting now if it wasn't for that. So we need to defend the right to protest because that's what we've got. We're in our numbers. We need to use that tool. It's the only thing we've got in our back pocket. Don't let them take it away from us, because if we do, we don't have a voice. So yes, follow anything Kill the Bill. Go out to a protest near you. There'll be another one next month. Look out for it. We'll share anything we can for the Northeast and beyond. If anybody wants to give us any details of any Kill the Bill protests happening, we will share that. Get out to it. And also write to your MP, your Labour Party MP, if you've got one, or Labour Party representatives, and get them to get out to these protests as well.
Okay, closing comments, anyone?
One thing I was going to mention, if you do want to get, like, obviously the next National Day of Action is a nationwide thing, and Collective Action London usually do like a great map with all the protests and actions going on up and across the country. Why can't I say up and down?
Up and down the country.
Up and down the country. That twice. But yeah, I agree, like getting out on the streets, mobilizing,
make it happen.
Yeah.
Spread the word.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on. We will have a very, very quick debrief after this, so don't go anywhere until then, but we will say goodbye to our viewers. Goodbye to our viewers now. We want to thank you, and thank you for all the work you're doing. It is incredibly important that you do this. So you have our thanks, and please do share anything that you're doing with us. We are really happy on Socialist Think Tank to share any of the work that you're doing. So use the networks that we have, and we will hopefully see you all again. See you later, everyone.
Keep the red flag flying here.